Greetings, I thought I'd give back to the community with this little video here. And this is actually a topic that has sprung up with both students and whatnot. Sometimes asking, when do I use a 7th chord? When do I use, what type of 7th chord do I use, etc., etc. We're just going to deal with 7ths, not extensions. What to remember is this is just generalized. These are the types of sounds you're going to get out of specific 7ths and specific triad combinations. And you could actually get some of the most dissonant things to actually sound melodic if you know what you're doing sometimes. So let me demonstrate it. So that has kind of like a march feel, right? But there's something I'm doing in there that you wouldn't really think somebody would do, is this sharp 9 sound. You'd think he'd use diatonic tones. I'm not. So every time I hit the dominant chord, I'm using that sharp 9 melodic tone instead of the raised 3rd melody tone, but you can't really tell because it's disguised. But that's basically the sound we're getting temporarily. The point is there's no absolutes. So this is a generalized guide on 7ths, and we're going to start with C natural minor. Okay, the first chord, 1, 4, and 5 are all minor chords. How you approach these chords, whether they're with minor 7ths or basic triads, is going to change how you feel about this progression. Let's use basic triads in the arpeggiation and just melody. Sounds almost kind of dark and a little bit sad. We're just going to improvise everything just so we can get through this video. So your perception may change if you start with all minor 7th chords. And this is especially true for the tonic. It sounds a little lighter. It sounds a little more tame. Especially when you cadence on that, as opposed to the regular triads. A little sadder, throwing those flat 7ths. A little more tamed out. So if we play these same chords with all minor 7ths, it sounds a little bit more tame. Almost like the darkness is taken out of minor. It's a little bit more pleasant, actually, and less dark. Well, that's the perception, just a generalized guide perception. And you might be better off doing stuff like this with these 7ths. That would be a very good reason to use them. If you want to sound a little bit darker, don't put them on the 1 chord. So here's a use with 7ths, but not on the 1 chord. And I do use a raised 3rd 5 there. So we're using some pass-through 7ths, okay? Pass-through. There's a little bit different. That's more of contrapuntal thinking. The same thing happened on the F minor. It passes through the 7th instead and goes to the D half diminished 7th, which we're not going to talk about in this video. The 7th degree can actually change your way you feel about it if it's contrapuntal movement. Now let's take this concept of chromatic mediant shifts. Film composers should know this really well because this is just super common to do stuff like that, especially with bass triads. Let me just arpeggiate. Everybody knows this sound. I'll just break out. Has a very mysterious sound when you use those chromatic mediant shifts with these basic triads. But you add a flat 7 to each one, suddenly your perception's a little different. It doesn't sound nearly as dark or mysterious. It's almost tamed out. The perception really shifts. It doesn't sound nearly as mysterious or dark as the basic triads do. So let's do a pulse like that we did before with the 7ths, flat 7ths. Let's do another chromatic mediant shift. It just doesn't sound nearly as dark when you add that flat 7 in there. However, do this with basic triads, and suddenly these shifts seem kind of mysterious. So just the flat 7 actually will change your perception about those chord changes. Doing the same thing but with major minor sevenths, it almost sounds disturbing. Now you have to actually spell it to D sharp when you go to E, because that would be the seventh of an E chord. Basic triads. Now let's do it with minor major sevenths. Sounds quite disturbing. So knowing that, if you want to create some really tense music, just knowing that will help. So if you use this minor major seventh, we're going to end up with a very tense, disturbing sequence, as opposed to tamed out using the flat seven. Again, remember these are just generalizations. So let's go through all three. Let's bass triads. We'll compare the three. Mysterious, dark. Minor seventh, tamed out. Minor major seventh, disturbing. So there's a good generalization on using chromatic median shifts like that, and whether you're going to use sevenths or not. Moving on to a Phrygian example, this is a super common sequence of chords. It would be the Phrygian 1, the Phrygian 2, the Phrygian 7, the Phrygian 1. Just a very common Phrygian move. So let's play Phrygian with bass chords pretty much, meaning the basic chords. And just... sounds like a dark, almost unresolved minor, right? But what happens when you switch all these basic triads up to seventh chords? It actually tames it out. That doesn't sound nearly as dark. This is most often true on tonic bass chords that use a minor seventh. So I'd probably use it more like this, as opposed to a dramatic feel, due to the flat 7 on the 1. So let's go into Dorian, and this is just a simple Dorian progression, but we're going to make it sound a lot different. So let's just do basic triads and just... It sounds like a very light minor, and like a chord progression you'd hear in like a fantasy score. However, if you change all these to seventh chords, listen to the change. Again, this has to do with the tonic having a flat 7, creating a taming effect. So you can do something like this. In fact, Dorian's a very common groovy kind of scale to use. So let's do some major chord shifts. That sounds kind of mysterious. Just with chord tones. Another favorite of film composers. Now the type of seventh you use on these is actually going to change how you feel about it. If I use like a major seventh to another major seventh, it almost sounds a little more dreamy. It's still very mysterious, but it's a little bit more dreamy. Here's basic chords. Major seventh. Sounds a little bit more dreamy with that major seventh instead of mysterious. I guess that's the best way to put it. So let's continue to shift in chromatic medians. C, E, G, B major. And let's do this experiment. Let's do this all with major sevenths. Suddenly our feeling about it's going to change. So what I'll do is I'll improvise with basic chords. I use a few non-harmonic tones. Basic chords. It's almost a really lovely sequence doing it that way, almost Ralph Vaughan Williams like. Now I'll improvise with all major sevenths. When we get to that B major, it certainly sounds way different than the first improvisation. Flat 7s definitely have a huge impact on things. Let's do C to A flat without a flat 7. Very common film scores kind of thing again. Flat 7s over major chords though can tend to, not all the time, can tend to have some kind of little bit of an impressionistic feel to it. It's because the impressionistic composers loved these chords, these dominant chords, as opposed to these basic triads. In fact, I can hear Debussy doing something like this. Actually, I have an idea. Let's use 3 dominant chords in a row that are chromatic median apart. Mixolydian. Very Debussy-like. So I jump between 3 different dominant chords, a chromatic median apart or a third apart, then to E dominant, and then just alternating between E dominant and B minor. A very Mixolydian kind of move. However, using a bunch of dominants doesn't necessarily mean they're going to sound impressionistic. That doesn't sound impressionistic right there. The augmented 6 chord is a dominant based shape. Sounds like a dominant chord. So it really depends on how you move the dominant chords around. So let's take a sequence and then add 7s to it. We're going to do A major, D minor, maybe a B flat, an A minor, and a D, giving us a very modally interchange kind of sequence. So what 7s would I choose? Well, maybe a major 7th over the A, that's fine. But when we get to the D minor, so here's that thing. Minor major 7th can sound a little disturbing, so let's try it with a flat 7. That actually sounds a little nicer for melodic reasons. So again, our progression is going to be A major, D minor. Let's review it. B flat, A minor, D. So we've determined with the A, we're going to use a major 7th, the D, minor 7th, B flat, let's use a major 7th. Now the A minor, again, are we going to use the minor major 7th? That sounds a little disturbing. Or the minor 7th, that sounds cleaner. Or smoother, I should say. Let's play them all with the minor major 7th, okay? That actually lacks flow. Let's compare the two. Minor 7ths on the minor chords. That flows nicely, which would make it much better suited for melodic music. That's very lovely. Let's do it with the minor major 7ths. Doesn't flow nearly as nicely. And to some people it might even sound like we're playing the wrong chord. So let's take a case example. If we use Mixolydian flat 6, 1 to 4, but we want to use 7ths on the 4, what can we do without sounding disturbing? You could actually do that and it still wouldn't sound that disturbing, but what I like to do when I'm using this scale is actually flat the 7 on the 4 chord because it just sounds so nice doing this. This is almost like the backdoor 2/5, by the way, even though I'm still thinking of Mixolydian flat 6. So I might do something like this. So hopefully this gives you some ideas on how to employ 7ths. You don't necessarily have to say this is the exact rule you have to follow and end of story. No, that's not how music works. There's always exceptions to every single thing. I'm just giving you general guidelines here. In the end, composition techniques are going to determine how something actually sounds. Even a minor major 7th doesn't have to sound disturbing. In fact, I could think of a few ways to change it up to where it might sound even slightly comical if used right in a compositional aspect. So don't throw a chord out simply because of these generalized guidelines. These are just generalized guidelines, hence the title. Because I've never ever in the entire history of music seen a specific chord that is used just for this specific reason, end of story. There's always exceptions.